This week, one of my friends from seminary, who is now a bishop in the Diocese of Texas, posted a series of photographs on his Facebook page from an event he attended in Houston. Some of you may be familiar with Lakewood Church there in Houston, the home of Joel Osteen, a well-known televangelist and author. Lakewood Church is the largest congregation in the United States. Tens of thousands of people attend worship every week. In fact, they bought the old Compact Center, the sports arena, and that is now home to their church. Jeff, in one of his photos, he is seen in the very pulpit of Lakewood Church itself, presumably leading a prayer at this event. Needless to say, I found it both hilarious and astonishing to see my friend from seminary, the one who, well, wasn't always as holy as we might like to think a bishop would be, now is not only dressed like a bishop, but there he is on those big screens in that mega church of all mega churches. And then in another one of his photos, he's standing next to the Roman Catholic cardinal of the area of the Archdiocese of Houston and Galveston. And in another, he's surrounded by leaders from all sorts and kinds of denominations. And there they are, men and women, black, white, and Hispanic, Protestant, Catholic, Anglican, all there together at a service for Christian unity. What struck me about the photos were the strange, or what I might deem as strange, juxtapositions. Bishop Fisher on the Jumbotrons was something I hadn't expected to see. Cardinal Dinaldo there, snuggled up next to Bishop Fisher with his arm around him, and there's Cardinal Dinaldo in all of his red and finery and everything else, just smiling back at the camera. Christians of all kinds, some of whom often take great exception to the theology of Joel Osteen, found themselves welcome in his church and in his own pulpit. It seems from those photographs and from all those gathered there that indeed it is dazzling, the paths that are available for disciples of all sorts and kinds. It's a dazzling array, indeed. Disciples, that's what Jesus is doing in this lesson today. We hear him calling his first disciples. Simon and Andrew, casting their nets in the Galilee, literally drop what they are doing in order to follow Jesus. And he goes a little further and finds James and John with their father Zebedee. They too drop what they are doing, leaving their poor father behind in the boat so that they can go and follow Jesus. They aren't scholars, they aren't teachers, they aren't the smartest bunch. They aren't the businessmen or the possessors of influence of any kind. They aren't wealthy and they aren't affluent. They are just normal people doing normal things, ordinary and unremarkable. And that's who Jesus calls to be his very first disciples. Jesus calls us from every walk of life to follow him into that new creation, to be his disciples, to bear witness to his presence in the world. Now, not to make light of the serious issues that continue to divide us, one Christian from another, yet this call to discipleship over and against those divisive issues, discipleship can be a unifying force. In light of this unity, some of those things that serve to divide us might more positively be understood as evidence of God's abundance and grace. The ways in which we can authentically live out our call to follow Jesus are more than many. Serious disciples from every family, language, people, and nation walk different paths, all oriented on the same star, Christ. One author writes, "Everywhere, the transformation into the new creation will look different, just as spring comes to each spot with subtly different signs and vestiges." We don't look at the snow melts in the spring in the Arctic and say because there aren't azaleas and daffodils, it's not really spring there. It is spring as spring can be in that part of the world. Likewise, the varieties of Christian experience lead us to follow Jesus in myriad ways, no one more important than the other. Yet too often we do make judgments on one another and the varying ways of following Jesus. Some say that Christians who don't read the Bible literally cannot truly call themselves Christians because obviously in order to know what God is calling us to, we need to have some clear plan set before us. Others say Christians who do read the Bible literally can't understand the true depth springing from the text if only they read on a surface level. Christians who worship in sports arenas, some might say, don't take worship seriously enough. It's too much like entertainment. Christians who worship in traditional spaces, that's you, are stuck in the past and can't translate the gospel message into today's vernacular. Christian Republicans or Christian Democrats are oxymorons depending upon which side or perspective you're coming from. Perhaps some say wealthy Christians, even if they are generous with what they have, can't be real disciples because they haven't yet done what Jesus told that rich young man to do in the gospel, to give it all away. Conversely, Christians who are focused so heavily on a social gospel about the concerns of the least and the poorest, well, they can't be real Christians because they don't take seriously enough the Bible's emphasis on certain moral principles. When I sent this sermon to my friend Jeff, because he was in it, I figured I could send it to him. He wrote back with one additional story from that day in Houston. While one of our Episcopal Hispanic priests was leading a prayer in Spanish, a heckler stood and began yelling that this was an abomination and taking swipes at gay folk and at the sins of the confessional. Presumably that was a jab at the Roman Catholics there, especially because the Roman Catholics and the Protestants were all mixed together. And after a moment, all of the judicatory leaders on that stage, from every family, language, people, and nation of Christians today, rose to their feet in solidarity, including Dodie Osteen, Joel's mother. And then many in the mixed choir that was there with them on the stage stood and began singing in tongues to drown out that heckler. Jeff says it was truly an awesome sight and sound. Others try to silence diversity, yet we rose to illustrate diversity in unity. What Bishop Fisher's photos and stories show is, even if only for a moment, a glimpse at the kind of Christian unity that doesn't require homogeneity. Christian disciples who looked different, thought differently, worshiped differently, followed different ways to the new creation were held together there that day, revealing more fully the magnificent spectrum of the Christian life. Not one more valid than another. One author writes that diversity amid unity and love must be our core foundation. Diversity amid unity in love. Not unity in everything, unity in love. A kind of unity that leaves room for different expressions of that same love. Not everyone needs to look and act and think as I do. What? Well, of course they do. Of course, or at least like us Episcopalians, if not like me. Because if I think that I'm on the right track, doesn't that mean that you're on the wrong one? It sounds rather simplistic, but I think oftentimes if we're honest with ourselves, we might hear that same question resonating somewhere deep down inside. As the world has shown itself to be predominantly gray, we continue to insist more and more upon black and white. The call to discipleship is also a call to charity and kindness. In this band of disciples, we've been lumped together with folks we like and folks we do not like. Ones with whom we can agree and ones with whom we cannot. Folks who challenge us and others who comfort us. Yet we all are called. We serve as disciples at Christ's bidding. And we don't get to tell him who's in and who's out. We're in this together, whether we like it or not. And since we're stuck together, we might as well learn something from it. My prayer is that we might learn to love one another as we are loved, to forgive one another as we are forgiven, and to remember that each of us is doing our best to work out our salvation in fear and in trembling. Surely this common state of being is enough to overcome whatever may threaten to divide us. Each of us is wonderfully made by our Creator in the image of our Creator. Diversity amid unity in love. How wonderful indeed.